Here it is, 2014, Game 2. Very beginning of turn 1. Here is the initial setup of the board. Game on. Alright, Game 2 of 2014 Axis. We have just completed turn 1 at the beginning of turn 2. We see that Chris for the U.S. has built up another carrier, waiting to bring that. Beefed up some guys in Hawaii in anticipation. I, as Japan, have followed roughly the same script, a couple deviations, but I am abandoning China, as experience has shown is probably the wisest move. Moving big into Amur, lots of planes to follow. Chris has abandoned the Philippines and said, run away, trying to get out of there. And Zach and UK Asia taking the big islands, as we have seen before, but focusing now on the land units. Which way will they go? This way, that way, this way, that way. Interesting. So the big story of round 1 has been Italy and its failures. So Chris, as the UK has been more aggressive in the Mediterranean than I was, took his navy into southern Italy to attack mine, while also taking his transport into Greece, activating those pro-Allied folks there. He eliminated my navy on the right-hand side, meaning the navy on the left-hand side there had to come in and clean that up. I was also forced to throw everything I had into Greece, including transporting a tank and a guy over, and using this sub here to get rid of the transport. As a result, although I could have taken these infantry and artillery into southern France, I elected not to, as we shall soon see, Germany is going to do that, so we can have a warm water port down there and help out the Italians, or at least have the capacity to do so should it become necessary. So a grievous loss of IPCs to the Italians, but hey, they got Greece to make up for it. UK and France, and ultimately US perhaps, as you'll see here, focusing on Italy first, which we've decided after the last game especially, last few games have shown that is a valid strategy. So see what happens on turn 2. Alright, so beginning of turn 3, game 2, 2014. The U.S. has made itself nettlesome by reinforcing the land units in Hawaii, making it that much more difficult for me to capture, and then conveniently placing these two guys in Midway in the hopes of preventing me from getting to Hawaii in the first place. Japan, having followed a pretty similar script to the last last game, with Japan having abandoned China, pursued the Russians up in the north. The Russians, though, are leading us back, not engaging, but moving the wall back and forth, and the Japanese are still pursuing, but with slightly fewer planes than what Chris had dedicated, and instead have been building up carriers like crazy. We're now up to 5 Japanese carriers, so we'll see what happens with that. Anzac minding his own business and doing pretty good business at that. 2 of the 4 money islands, and getting ready for its bonus there in Dutch New Guinea. The Indians deciding to pivot left and head to the Middle East with everything they can, bolstering that island in Sumatra, but otherwise just chilling out. Where, in fact, you even see some Indian planes here in Africa really taking that one seriously. The Italians, having run the odds on our Axis calculator, determined that there was no good way for them to win anytime soon. And so we see them pulling back strategically a bit here. The Italians, having fought valiantly with the various navies in the Mediterranean, actually had the bonus for no Allied ships in the Mediterranean there and got that, but the French again have made a nuisance of themselves and just poking in the corners there to take that bonus back away. The British, having threatened to bring everything down to the Mediterranean, then doubled back and built up a carrier to go with it. So building up their fleet in anticipation of some Americans coming on over and joining the party. We see Russia doing what Russia's got to do, building up, yet also building up quite an offensive force there in the northern factory, getting ready to go all buck wild on Finland should it get the opportunity here in round 3. So here we are, beginning of turn 4 of game 2, 2014. We see that the Japanese have adopted the strategy of roaming their planes all around, except that they're doing it with carriers here in the Navy. We see 5 different carrier groups or so, 2, 4, a lot of aircraft carriers. In response, Chris spent all of the U.S.'s money in a desperate bid to protect San Francisco from Japanese invasion. We see 10 subs that he bought there for a total of 14, in addition to the rest of his Navy, sitting off the coast of the western U.S. So, because Chris blocked access to Hawaii with some well-placed little ships there, we invaded Wake Island instead, took out that plane that was there, and are waiting to do some business down that way. Over here, both India and Australia threw everything they had. This Japanese fleet killed 1 ship, broke both carriers, but all in all, the rolls went pretty well on that for Japan. We see we're continuing to slowly gobble up Far East Russia, whereas India and the UK have had their way with the southern half of the world, pretty much owning all of the Middle East and Africa. Now, though, we see some British tanks coming up to reinforce the Soviet lines, because Germany is expanding pretty quickly, poised to do some more damage there, and Russia, having attacked on turn 3, taken some key footholds there along the border. Russia reacting by taking Finland, and pretty much has the whole Scandinavian peninsula under its thumb. US and UK positioning their fleets, building up some more in the UK there, trying to reinvigorate that navy. While Italy, pretty weak, just defending itself, and Germany, and getting ready for round 4. Beginning of turn 5 of game 2, 2014. U.S. has taken the bait and moved down here to Hawaii. Japan pulled back from Wake Island. The Carolines now has its positions in the various naval bases around here. We see that Japan has now conquered 3 of the 4 Money Islands and has a substantial presence down there in South Asia, continuing the march across the top. India continuing to build up some guys as a defensive measure. We have the British and Anzac chasing the Italians across North Africa, resulting in the first ever acquisition of territory for Anzac in the middle of Africa. Germany continues its push into Russia, having taken Ukraine and the factory there last turn, while Russia builds up in the north, and the other allies have taken Norway, dumped a whole lot of stuff down there as well. Italy has the Mediterranean open again. We'll see how long that goes, and the U.S. bringing in another transport here on round 5. Beginning of turn 6, 2014 game 2. U.S. has made its big push into the Carolines, taking it decisively with a lot left over, you'll see. It's just ugly. And Anzac moving its carrier up to reinforce. You see that Japan, emptying the Philippines, had gone big for the Money Islands, which is great. Got some bonus now. Japanese Isles there, got a couple carriers left. India pretty much reduced to rump status, having spent half its money repairing its factory and the rest building a few guys. In Russia, Germans decided to park all their tanks on Moscow's front door, causing Russia to pile everything in there, as well as the British defenders that had come up from India. Everything possible that could reach Moscow is there to defend it, including the aircraft carriers from up north. We see that, again, Chris couldn't resist the temptation to attack. Took the Baltic states, have a few tanks left over, big battle there last turn. On the mainland in Europe, not much action other than some mutual strat bombing going on. Italy reinforcing the mainland and just building up infantry on both sides. The Americans and UK coming down from Norway, building a factory there. Building a naval base in Iceland, parking its navy way up there. And some more Americans on the way. We'll see what they do on turn 6. Round 7, beginning of Game 2, 2014. It's been a busy turn. We see that the U.S. Had attacked in the Caroline Islands and messed Japan up, is now stepped back to reconsolidate in the Hawaiian Islands, bolstered by some transports this time, so that they actually pose a land invasion threat. More transports along the way. In the meantime, Japan has made a decision to go all in the Indian Ocean battle, having taken all 4 islands now. Pulled back from the Philippines and consolidated everybody down here. Had been tempted to go into India last turn, but consolidated and built up for this next coming turn. We'll see we built an aircraft field, an air base in French Indochina, and then pulled down every aircraft from Japan to then land in Indochina, and equipped by that air base now, they'll be in a position to strike India next turn as well. So making sure I have the hits necessary for the next turn rather than taking a risk, an unwarranted one perhaps, in the last turn. That made possible, of course, only by the fact that the U.S. didn't have any transports in Hawaii the prior turn, so not posing an invasion risk to Japan on this turn. Japan continues the long march to the north. Now getting close to knocking on Moscow's door. However, see Germany, as had been my plan, but perhaps a debatable one, to be sure. These guys here in Bryansk that were knocking on Moscow's door split in 2 directions, took the northern factory and the Volgograd factory, so now I have all 3 of those factories, or I had anyway, and got those 2 bonus cities, so had a hefty amount of cash come in. However, that left Russia with an ungodly number of infantry there in Moscow, and he bought tanks, had a few tanks to supplement them with, had consolidated all the British backup forces that were on their way in, so the Russians were able to break out into Bryansk and then clear a path for the Indians to take Ukraine back, and in fact reinforce it so that I can't even get there next turn. So that is certainly going to slow down my progress. I still got, a force to be reckoned with there, but we see these guys coming to knock on Volgograd's back door, likely to be a problem there. And of course the Americans building up in Norway, piling up in Finland there to put pressure on the northern factory as well. So this could be a long, drawn-out land battle to maintain control up there. We see that the U.S. has cleared the Atlantic now and piling in all sorts of ships. The UK building up as well. and the Italians now haven't been chased all the way back to the Atlantic Ocean, where they're about to make their brave last stand here on turn 7. Beginning of turn 8, game 2, 2014, and it's probably still the most evenly balanced game we've had at this point of the game. We see that the U.S. has moved the majority of its Hawaiian fleet, really all of it, to the Carolines. That's the move they decided to make this turn, and took it decisively. So the Japanese are a little bit underhanded there in Japan. They moved up a couple ships to the Philippines, left a couple rear guard there in Java, but the big news for Japan, of course, was that they committed everything they could to invade Calcutta and took it. The decent amount of stuff left over. We built an air base in Shan State, where most of the planes had to land. They didn't need to land there, of course, but it increases their options in the next turn. And come to a standstill up there at the north. Really the big turn here, well, we see UK is kind of regrouping here in Persia, because they don't really have anything left to do in Russia. Russia had a huge turn this time around. Germany had built up 3 planes in Stalingrad, determined to keep it. The odd machine told me I had a 70% chance of winning the battle. I had about the 10th percentile. Russia threw everything they had at it and not only survived, but survived rather handedly. And, of course, beefing up Ukraine as well, since they prevented me from taking it. So, momentum is definitely turned against Germany at this point, which is frustrating to say the least. The Italians managed to contribute something to the Russian front, and Germany is setting itself up for counterattack, but then, gee whiz, U.S. and U.K. doing the same thing up here in Norway. A bit concerning, so much so that both Italy and Germany has thrown everything they can into holding Denmark. I wonder why. The Italians have chased all the way. Turn 9, game 2, 2014. When's the last time you saw an Anzac aircraft carrier in San Francisco Bay? So it's been interesting. The Anzacs are coming up and reinforcing the U.S. back line while the U.S. fleet continues to push forward in an ugly manner. Having elected, after I built up both in Japan and the Philippines, to go south, a route that I did not block, although it was physically possible for me to do so. And instead, he took one of my money islands, cutting into my Japanese bonuses. So that's not cool. Not feeling too happy about that. I did make a very bold and aggressive move here with Japan, piling up on Moscow's border. Perhaps not close enough. Should have been either more aggressive or less aggressive with that move, I think, but may have played it too conservatively. We'll see. We broke Japan out into Iraq, and in response, the UK is building up. Got some subs down here in South Africa. Finally eradicated the Italian presence from North Africa. Only took 7 turns, and now they're all headed back to defend Egypt. The Germans look poised to take Ukraine again, but remember, that's 30 or so, well, 25 infantry sitting there in Bryansk, having come down from Moscow, and now Germany's got problems ahead. Meanwhile, the U.S. and UK forces continue to pile up in Normandy, or Norway rather, and now spilling over into Karelia, actually putting them in to attack. Turn 10, Game 2, 2014. It has been an active turn. Anzac now defending Hawaii, which is full of subs. Japan finally succeeded in scaring off the U.S. From its money islands, making them back off a bit, only by building 2 battleships and a destroyer there in India as a backstop. Left the American flag on celebs, so I'm losing some money. So I spent my whole Japanese build on naval units last turn, except for a factory in Iraq. We're going to be there, might as well be there. And so we're built up there. UK is responding by bringing everything it can, including some dudes that have been built in South Africa. Now fly through to the USSR. We see that the Japanese have brought all their land units down here to Kazakhstan, while the air units flew over here to Novgorod. You'll see that they're no longer there. An epic, intense battle where the U.S. was killing bombers instead of tanks so that he could leave that one tank left there in Novgorod, allowing then the Brits to come in on the next turn, take Baltic states, block the supply line from Germany so that I cannot take the factory back this turn. Very frustrating. U.S. went all out for that one, including leaving some transports exposed. We got rid of those. UK pulled its fleet back to the homeland there to build back up. We've got more American transports on the way. America is spending all of its money just about in the Atlantic. In fact, I do believe it was all of it last turn. And the British forces, having eradicated the Italians, are now on their way back to Africa to deal with the Japanese. What will happen on turn 10? We are at the beginning of round 11, game 2, 2014. U.S. asserting itself in Russia there, and having been chased from the New Guinea Islands, U.S. supported by Anzac has regrouped in the Carolines. Quite a massive force there to now parallel my own there in Japan. Japan itself relatively unguarded. Which way will we go there? Anzac making way too much money. Japan had all its bonus islands back, only to have one of them taken again by Anzac, predictably enough. Japan has built a factory in Korea to beef that up. Japan has also beefed up its South Asian forces here against possible invasion. So we've moved over to the Caucasus from Kazakhstan, while Russia continues to build up here in this factory. Italy bombed the Ukraine. And that's not the only bomb that describes Italy's play this game. We see that the U.S. and UK have now moved south to take advantage of the soft underbelly of Europe, and the Italians pulling back to defend the homeland with everything they can. Germany ultimately elected not to go hard either north or south, but rather to guard access to the north and bide its time there in the middle. Russia not doing a whole lot other than setting up the stage for U.S. and UK to come down big from Karelia again and reinforce. And we have another Navy on its way from the United States. How will this go on turn 11? Turn 12, beginning of game 2, 2014. Has continued to be a bloody one. U.S. moving back from the Carolines, back over to this C-Zone 44 here, and loading up with not only all the U.S. stuff, going back to Celeb, reoccupying it again, but also bringing over the increasingly large Anzac fleet, which just added its own battleship, if you can imagine that. Continuing to be shadowed by the growing Japanese fleet. Japan last time having bought a bunch of planes and loaded up the ones in Japan, all in Korea, in anticipation of a possible land invasion that did not come. And so they are hanging out up there. We got some guys in India here prepared to do something if the opportunity arises. The folks in Iraq continue to build up bit by bit. While in Russia, we see that the Russians have moved a significant contingent down to the bottom to deal with the growing Japanese threat. Germany holding its own along the border there, with all the allies piling up there in the Baltic states. One glimmer of good news for the Axis this turn is that the Allied fleet that had built itself up in the Mediterranean was under-defended. The Italian Air Force knocking that out, taking a lot of transports with it, slowing down the invasion process, which will continue here on turn 12. Turn 13, Game 2, 2014. Alright, the back and forth in the Pacific has continued. U.S. back to C-Zone 46 after the Japanese met them in Malaya. Not without leaving a few presents first, namely transports enough to take over every single money island in the Philippines to boot, giving Japan a real kick in the pants as far as economy goes. So, still holding on to India. All of North Soviet Far East is gone except for one territory now. The Russians have decided to go all in on the southern front here, confronting the Japanese, who have purchased planes and reinforced as much as possible. They stopped them up short there in Jordan, but they are piling in. The Americans coming in from that first wave of transports. We see tanks coming up from South Africa aplenty. Italy collected no money this turn because of those subs convoying me to death. You'll see that Germany's factory is completely shut down with 20 points of damage. And the U.S. is here. Another load of transports, this time better protected, ready to do its worst in southern Europe. UK has purchased another carrier because it didn't have enough, and yet another American fleet is on its way. So, a couple things went right for Axis this turn. The Germans destroyed the collected might of the Russians, Americans, and British up in the Baltic states with 11 tanks left over. Of course, the Allies now gathering up to hit on another front. Russia then, a little thin on the front lines, but got plenty of guys there backed up, ready to do some damage here on turn 13. Beginning of turn 14 of Game 2. The U.S. is bringing some more subs. They like the subs. Got a transport full of dudes headed back down to the what is now the permanent military installation here in New Guinea, with just as many ridiculous Anzac naval units as there are American at this point. Countermatched over here by the Japanese down in Malaya. Got a sub up there that they built. Pretty much a standstill on both fronts. We eliminated the American transports, but they left behind some goodies. Japan was able to retake Sumatra, while the Russians continue their inexorable march toward the south. Japan building up in Iraq. 3 more planes built there this turn. So the Russians and British have bided their time trying to build up sufficient forces around that border. This gargantuan mound of 17 dudes marches its way towards India. Germany, tempted by the under-defended Novgorod factory, sent all its tanks back up there to take it, primarily because it knew it could hold it again this turn, because there wasn't anything there in a position to take it back. So we see the Americans and the British have piled once again all their stuff into Norway. and another fleet on its way here from the U.S. The U.S. getting something like 90 IPCs every turn, so they're just able to pile in a ridiculous amount of stuff, whereas for the past 2 turns, Italy has collected nothing because these subs have completely destroyed what meager resources it already gets. We'll see how that pans out on turn 14. Beginning of round 15 in game 2. That's 10 U.S. subs getting ready to join the fray down here in the South Pacific, joining the conga line down to Sea Zone 46, where the party is welcoming its 4th Anzac battleship on the way. It's pathetic. While the Japanese build up their own fleet in Malaya, having built a factory there this turn to get ships to the front line more quickly. Getting spread back out again in the Soviet Far East. Down in the Middle East, we've had some action now. The Brits threw everything they had at Iraq, had a bad first round, decided to pull out, but the Russians get to march these guys that they've brought all the way down from Moscow into Iraq next turn. On the German front, tanks from Novgorod came back down to eastern Poland. Decided not to try to hang on to that with all these Americans coming at them. However, the German factories are all damaged to the maximum right now. So Germany's production is completely shut off, and the entire continent is filled with subs that have been convoying the heck out of me. The U.S. supply line is sputtering a bit as it spends all its money in the Pacific this turn, but it still has plenty of units here on the board to do some damage in round 15. Okay, after further deliberation, we have decided to call the game here at the beginning of turn 15 as a victory for the Allies. Now, as we've seen, there's still quite a bit of battling left to do, especially down here in the Pacific. Japan is not going to fall anytime soon. It's still got quite a bit of life left in it. There is some fighting yet to do down here, and Germany still owns all of its original territory, has quite a few tanks there, but realistically, once Italy goes 3 turns without making any money, once every single one of Germany's factories are shut down due to damage, and when Russia controls virtually all of its original territory, you know that the writing is on the wall. So, what could we have done differently in this game? Well, from the Axis perspective, it became clear that while I played those first few rounds well, at least for Germany and Japan, I think I squandered the advantage at critical points of the game for both of those countries by splitting up my forces and critically by trying to do too much. Even compared to last year, I was still more conservative in my play, my strategic decision making, but even that I think was not enough. I got a little heady with all the tanks here knocking on Moscow's door, tried to take all 3 of these factories and was not able to hold on to any of them as it came out. By forcing Russia to build up 20, 30 guys there in Moscow, and then a few tanks on top of that, they became an unstoppable force that pushed me all the way back. In the meantime, we've got the U.S. and everything building up here in Norway. I fought with them in the Atlantic a few times, but seeing how inconsequential that Atlantic fleet had been in the prior game, I didn't put a lot of emphasis on it. And this time, I still kept it slow. I killed some transports, both in the Atlantic and Mediterranean at critical times, which slowed down the Allied advance, but ultimately not enough. When I'm spending all these resources here trying to hold too much Russian territory, it doesn't give me enough resources to spend on the Allies, especially when they have the planes at their disposal to shut me down economically. Italy, they were really what killed this game for the Axis, I think. Germany and Japan, they had their issues, but they wouldn't have had to fight so hard if, and on so many fronts, really. Germany wouldn't have had to try to do so much if Italy could have contributed to the battle, both by taking away British IPCs and by gaining some ground, putting some pressure. All right, continuing. So Italy's naval battle didn't go so well, and was never able to fully capitalize on taking Egypt there. And from there, it was just a slow retreat and slow withering instead of expanding for Italy. Japan, I'm still a fan of what I did with the aircraft carriers, using and exploiting that air power in the ocean, and then ultimately on the islands in India, on those carriers instead of exclusively on land. But I think that the critical mistake for Japan was, after having taken India, I immediately launched out into Iraq, and even that would have been so bad, but then I built a factory, which I then had to defend, and I got a little bit excited, a little bit too aggressive with these guys in Novosibirsk, brought them forward and down, spread them out and everything else, threw all my planes away in Karelia, instead of holding what I had and securing it critically, bringing back infantry to reinforce some of those positions, and concentrating on the Pacific game rather than trying to win both boards with one country. Again, wouldn't have been necessary if Italy could do its job, but there you go. Chris, your Allied perspective.
Alright, so, start over here. My thoughts on this game is the importance of infantry for the Axis. I don't think can be overstated, because they're the only thing that can hold territory and protect the really expensive units to gain leverage. And ultimately, I think the quick expansion too far westward and then the quick expansion this way without being able to reinforce, ultimately I think is what allowed me to leverage most of my win. You know, Brian had these islands, had to take units off of them because he just didn't have enough boots on the ground to be able to reinforce all of those, which allowed me to sneak in. I took all of them back. He's not in a position to get back there. I think the U.S. is getting something like 93 or 94 a turn, just dumping it in, pouring in submarines, which are effectively naval infantry units. So that's hard to deal with. Things that I thought worked well. First turn for the UK, we put 2 tanks and a mechanized infantry there to come up and help knock the Italians out of Egypt. It was a short jolt over to the Middle East to lock down all those IPCs for Britain, securing the Mediterranean and knocking them out. That does 2 things. Number 1, it allows me to have free reign in Africa. Number 2, if he wants to rebuild his navy, then he's not building infantry to support the backside of Russia, because Germany needs to go into, or the backside of Germany, because Germany needs to move into Russia to move those guys in. Hard to play and do a lot. I think you have to focus on doing one thing really, really well, lock that down, and then do the next thing, which I did at times, but then I made mistakes because you have something that's working well, and you're like, oh, I know, here, let me move down this complete huge navy that I've got up here that I spent 4 turns building up to the southern, leaving 4 transports up there, and then 7 transports under defended down here, and losing all of that and setting the game back 4 turns, because that's just stupid. If it's working, then don't deviate from it, keep that going, and then rebuild up enough support units to go in and do something else. So that was my mistake I think I made with the U.S. Things in the midterm to late term game that I thought worked well. Started building some subs out of the Union of South Africa, moving them up, locking down that sea zone next to Italy. That's 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 10, 12 IPCs right there for that one convoy zone that you can potentially knock out, meaning that's probably the most expensive single piece on the board. If you can get a whole bunch of subs there, subbing up there, taking over Norway worked well, built a factory there, started churning out strat bombers to turn off all these factories, because if the factories are off, then they can't build infantry. If they can't build infantry, the tanks start having to take hits. When the tanks start having to take hits, you can reinforce back your lines. I think that's the name of the game. So, the first game I think was 6, 7, 8 turns when we called it. We probably called it a little bit earlier. This game was 15 turns. I guess if both people are making expensive buys and not building infantry and are being super aggressive, you'll know after 5 or 6 turns who's going to win. But I really think this is a game that, if both sides are playing conservatively and building up their lines and reinforcing things, that you might be able to get this game to go 20, 30 turns. That would be interesting next year to see if we could get a full game going, round after round after round, where things turning over. I think these border territories here turned over 3 or 4 times. That's the thing that I think kind of makes the game pretty fun. So, good stuff. Oh, Anzac, I forgot to mention them. They were not incredibly useful, but the one thing that they did do is they kept Australia, and they got that one bonus, which means they were ending up with 20. So in the late game, they were just building 1 battleship every turn and sending it up. That's 4 Anzac battleships, 2 Anzac carriers with 4 guys. I mean, you can't attack with that Navy, but Anzac backing up the U.S., I think, makes that a pretty potent defensive infrastructure to keep pace with Japan, so that you're putting minimal resources in the Pacific really just as a counterbalance to what Japan's doing, because you're spending, or at least in this game I was spending, ridiculous sums of money in Europe to secure Norway, get all those bombers, shut the factories down, support the UK. So lots to be done, and I think balance and being conservative is the name of the game for next year. Oh, and by the way, this is now the 4th game in a row that I won, so I just want to proclaim that I am dominating Wasm in this game.